In my everyday life, I find peace and connection to the universe. Here at this retreat, with birds in cages, noise, junk food, blah, blah, or something like that, I am finding it hard to connect to that peace. How would you cope if you had to live in a disco for a week? Let's just address there are two parts to this. One is the part of here, not living in these unusual surroundings, not your usual, perhaps more sedate and peaceful surroundings. How would you cope? Okay, that's a hypothetical situation that's very unlikely to ever happen to me. But if it did, there are two possibilities, of course. One is you open the door and go out and leave, and then you're at peace. If you can't be at peace in the disco, my choice would be to open the door and step outside and leave. But if the doors are locked, I suppose that's what you're talking about. The doors are locked and I can't get out. What's left is surrender, so I would probably start dancing. And the same here, there's a clash between what makes you feel comfortable. You perhaps live in a quiet place and you're not usually surrounded by sun-bathing tourists. And birds in cages. I haven't seen them, but they must be around. And junk food. Of course, you don't have to eat it, but it's quite good for retreats to be. I haven't yet, by the way, found an ideal retreat setting. One would have thought that going to an ashram in India would be more conducive to inner peace than being in a big hotel in Hawaii. But there too you'll find things that disturb your peace. For example, my first night in an ashram in India, you're on this bed, and I was given a deluxe room, as they call it. They said the Queen of Spain had also spent some time in that room. So you're lying on your bed. The temperature is just 1 degree less than at midday. It's extremely hot under a mosquito net, and then sleep doesn't come. At 1:30 in the morning, the need to go to the toilet arises. But there are several huge mosquitoes sitting on the outside of the net, waiting for you to emerge. And then you just wait a little longer, and finally you have to get out. Being pursued by the mosquitoes, you run to the bathroom. And in the bathroom, suddenly a flutter arises, and there's a big bat flying around the ceiling. And finally you manage to get back under your mosquito net, and there's a little bit of sleep. And then at 4:30 there's a knock on the door. Oh no, that's not all, I forgot. At 2:30, there's in the street, there's a loudspeaker of very low sound quality, with some lovely religious chanting going on. Why are they chanting in the street through a loudspeaker at 2:30 in the morning? I don't know, but it's Ram, Ram, in a way it's lovely because they're chanting about God, and it doesn't matter if they wake people up. And then after 20 minutes that subsides, and then there's a little bit of sleep. And at 4:30 there's a knock on the door, and a man, get up, open the door, of course it's still dark, and a man comes with a bucket with hot water and said, "The hot water you ordered, it's 5:30. It's 4:30, I ordered it for 5:30. Of course, there's no point in saying, no, come back. No, you surrender. You have to surrender every moment so that you become one with whatever is in that moment. So you immediately adjust to that. You adjust to the mosquitoes not being able to sleep, or you become unhappy. And so you accept that the hot water comes at 4:30 instead of 5:30. And so it goes on. And then finally you go for breakfast in the big hall. You sit on the floor. There's a banana leaf on the floor, and a man comes with a huge bucket. What's in it? I don't know. And then a ladle, and he goes on your banana leaf. Flop. And it's wonderful, continuous one becoming one with what is. And here you have the tourists and the parrot birds in cages and junk food. Probably the food on the banana leaf is more healthy in some ways. It's not junk food. On the other hand, there may be certain things in there that the Western body is not used to, which then results in very frequent visits to the bathroom. Wherever you go, there will be an opportunity for surrender rather than and that's part of the retreat, and it's part of really life, because wherever you go, you will find you'll get challenged by life. There'll be something that you need to surrender to, or you walk out. But very often you need to go with it. Rather than having expectations how things should be, you go with how things are, the isness, I call it, the isness of things in the present moment. And if you can be one with the isness, whether it's the bat in the bathroom or whether it's the tourists here, then wherever you go, you can find peace. That really is the purpose for realizing that, and without saying conditions need to be in a certain way to be conducive. And if you could find the absolutely ideal place for a retreat where everything works and everything is absolutely immaculate and perfect, the food is exquisite, the temperature is just right, you get massages every day in addition to the pampered, in every need is immediately met. You just have to say something and somebody comes and, yes, now you're totally undisturbed for meditation. Absolutely perfect. Is that the ideal retreat? Not really. The imperfections are actually more helpful than the perfect conditions. In the ideal retreat or the ideal life, which doesn't exist, the life without challenges would be very similar to going to a movie in which there is no conflict. Everybody is peaceful, nothing really happens because there's no drama. The characters in the movie are not challenged by anything. And so the movie viewers would go, Titanic without the accident. A perfect crossing. 2.5 hours of that. But this is how people want their lives to be. They have this inner expectation, that's how it should be or can be. But it's not like that. And then you begin to welcome the challenges. It's actually fine. You don't demand that conditions should be perfect. They never are perfect. And if they are, you go to sleep. Or if they are not perfect for very long. Or you get so bored. Oh, there's a question here about what is boredom? So that's the next question. The main factor that makes teenagers so angry, because they know there's something important missing, and often they're angry at their parents, and their parents have done all they thought they could do, all the best. They're doing your best is not enough. Many children, almost all children, already have pain bodies, some stronger than others. And that's another important point here, where when you observe the tantrum earlier in the previous session today, somebody said their mind sometimes feels like a toddler's tantrum taking place in their mind. Yes, the tantrums of toddlers can be quite violent. They may throw themselves on the floor and scream or throw, and that is the pain body. So I would highly recommend, and this should be done at schools as part of the curriculum, and there should be there are a few children's books that teach that also. Teach the child to be aware of their pain body, not while it happens, because nobody will be listening to you. You cannot make even an adult, you cannot make them aware of their pain body in the middle of a pain body attack. That does not work, because the only person you'll be speaking to is the pain body, and the pain body won't like it. But afterwards, the next day, you talk to the child, what happened yesterday when you threw yourself on the floor? What was that? What was that thing that got into you? What do you remember that? What was that thing? What did that feel like? If you had to make a drawing of it, what would it look like, that thing that got into you? What would that look like? What color is it? But, encourage the child to place attention on the emotion, in other words, there's a presence there that instead of being the emotion, the child can begin to become aware of the emotion. This does not necessarily prevent the next pain body attack, but then you do it again. Next pain body, and then next day you say, that happened again. Was it the same thing? Did it feel the same as before? Was it the same little gremlin there? If the child, but let the child use the terms, and then say, yes, it was the same. Okay, encourage perhaps the child to make a little painting of it, and the next time it happens, then you can say, well, in the middle of it or at the beginning of it, the tantrum is starting to happen, then you can say, there it is again, isn't it? And that can bring in awareness even while it's happening. But the child, you need to prepare the child first, otherwise it won't work. And they may not necessarily stop it. It will probably continue, but at least a little bit of awareness will have come in. There it is again, isn't it? Yeah, no, it isn't. It's not. I also remember as a child, there was a time in my early teens, I had very negative emotions, very self-destructive, violent emotions. I didn't act them out, fortunately, but I was almost consumed by very destructive emotions. And of course, nobody had any idea of presence or mindfulness at that time anywhere. Would have been unheard of. And virtually all parents were very unconscious. At least nowadays there's a certain percentage of parents that are relatively conscious and bring up their children consciously as much as possible. But even then, you will find the difficulty of dealing with the child's emotions. So very, very important at an early age, begin to teach the child to be conscious of their emotions rather than being taken over by the emotions. The worst thing you can do is when the child has a pain body attack, allow it to trigger your pain body, which unfortunately happens quite a lot too, because the energy of the pain body is so raw and there's such aggression in it that an unconscious parent will be drawn into deeper unconsciousness and then react and start shouting, "Stop it, stop it!" Of course, it won't stop it. So the pain body has spread even to the parent. So these are all important things to bring presence so that the teenage years then become a little easier. Another important thing that also should be practiced at school, but its home environment is very important. How do the parents live? When you bring up children, the greatest teaching is how the family relates to it, how the parents relate to each other, and so on. That's what the children absorb, rather than what they are being told. There should be the household, there should be presence in the household, in the family environment. And a very important aspect of that is to listen to the child. It's amazing that this should be practiced also at schools, but more importantly at home, for the parent to listen to the child. And you would be amazed how many cases it doesn't happen at all, because the parents are so lost in doing. They have a busy life, they are lost in doing, and the only way they interact with the child is either telling the child what to do or what not to do. Don't do that. Have you done this? No, you need to do that. Have you done your homework? Okay. And they mean well. They want to do the best for their child and to encourage the child to do the right thing. Don't go there. Don't knock that. Just, have you brushed your teeth? Don't go brush your teeth. Okay, good night. They don't to give. When I say listen, I mean to give the child attention beyond any doing or not doing. Give the child attention. What happened today? How are you feeling? What do you have to tell me? This. Give it. It doesn't matter what the child says, but you direct attention, not attention that involves doing. Pure attention. The child wants to be recognized by the parent in its being. And if the parent does not recognize the child in its being, the child can feel unconsciously that there is something missing.
It wants to be recognized in its beingness, not just do the right thing. It's not the doing. Doing is necessary, but that's the being is so. And then that is one of perhaps the main factor that makes teenagers so angry, because they know there's something important missing, and often they're angry at their parents, and their parents have done all they thought they could do, all the best. They brush their teeth every night. And make sure that they do their homework. And now have you done that? And he said, no, it wasn't enough. Doing your best is not enough, because what's missing is being. So no matter how much you do, it's not enough. You have to bring in the dimension of being in the interaction with your child. So give them attention. That means you too have to refrain from doing for a moment and be with the child. First you have to be with yourself. You have to go deep enough so that you can be present, and then you look at the child, and that's right. And you don't want anything from him or her. You just look, and then perhaps words happen. You talk a bit. What did you do today? It doesn't matter what the child says. The attention that you give, that's what the child longs for. It wants to be recognized by the parent in its being. And so that in this world that is still relatively rare, unfortunately, and that's one of the biggest mistakes parents make, but they can't help it because they haven't recognized it in themselves. So in order to live this, you need to recognize it in yourself, and then you can live it. So there's a lot there that is possible and necessary in the upbringing of a child, and I know that more and more teachers are becoming interested in this, and more teachers are bringing it into their classroom, not officially yet in many cases, but they introduce some elements of presence or mindfulness into their classroom. But it needs to be practiced on a much larger scale, because the world is going to, what's that weird expression? To hell in a handbasket. I don't know where that comes from, but it's not moving in the right direction, you might have noticed. And there is a lot of unhappiness in children, and a lot of early, they're prescribed mind-altering drugs at an early age when that is not necessary. In fact, it's bad, just because the parents are not present. They don't even know what presence is. They don't know any better. So all this is, these are very important changes that need to happen. The thing that happens to you is less important, less significant than the way in which you respond to the thing that happens to you. That determines your entire life experience. Many of you would not be here if you had not gone through serious challenges in your life. You would still be sitting on the sofa right now watching Netflix. Comfort zones are wonderful when they happen, and sometimes one gets them in one's life. You have when everything seems to be working fairly well or very well. Health is good, finance is okay, work situation is fine. Security, I have my life insurance, pension scheme, investments, all working. Stock market hasn't collapsed yet. Its stock market is doing okay. Relationships are fine. A loving wife, husband, whatever. Children, my children are doing great. They're all successful. It's absolutely fantastic. I have a nice house. Everything is absolutely great. My aging parents are fine too. That's a kind of fiction that very rarely happens. And when it does happen, it doesn't last very long. So if your life situation, so the totality of what I've just described, we could call that, or I call that, life situation. If your life situation is in the way I have just described, which is extremely unlikely that there's a single human being here whose life situation is as I just described, but if it is, just wait a little. So the challenges come on a personal level, only affecting you or your family or your people close to you. And other types of challenges come on a collective level. And the degree to which the challenges come on a collective level affect the individual varies from person to person. But sometimes huge things happen that affect almost everybody's life. For example, COVID, we had that. I now use, and some other people do use the expression BC when talking about years. We had a retreat here in 2018 BC, before COVID. So that affected everybody. Some people obviously, some people died. Others were ill for a while, or for a considerable amount of time. But even if you didn't fall ill, it probably affected you one way or another, to a lesser degree. But how you experience that situation, that collective challenge, ultimately depended on your state of consciousness, not the external challenge itself, because human beings experience the same challenge in different ways depending on their state of consciousness, the state of consciousness with which you meet the challenge. That is more important. In other words, the thing that happens to you is less important, less significant than the way in which you respond to the thing that happens to you. That determines your entire life experience. And that's a very important lesson. We could call that a very important piece of wisdom, that your life experience, the way in which you experience your life, is to a great extent determined by the way in which you respond to the situations that you encounter, and especially the challenges. Challenge is a word for problem. Some people call it problem, difficulty, bad, something bad. When you call something bad, something that would conventionally be called bad, you call it a challenge, there's already a positive spin on it. And sometimes when it's happening to you in the moment, you may not say, oh, this is a great challenge, unless you're very conscious already. You only experience this is really bad. And then perhaps some higher level of consciousness then kicks in and says, well, is it really bad? Does it actually need to determine my state of consciousness? Am I at the mercy of external conditions? Or can I rise above external conditions as far as my state of consciousness is concerned, my state of being? And the French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre said, when you quote people, make sure when you say you're going to quote somebody, make sure that you know what it is you're going to say. That's another piece of wisdom. I think he said something like, life is what you do with what's been done to you. Something like that. That is the most important thing. What do you do with what has been done to you? Not an accurate, not a literal quote, but more or less. So that's already something. Even this little piece of wisdom, if you apply it in your daily life, can change everything. The way in which you experience other people. Because for many humans, challenges come in the form of other people. Because the weird thing is, you might have noticed, people are difficult. And many people are very unconscious. Not you, others. And for many people, some of their greatest challenges, not perhaps the very greatest, maybe your physical state, your health is even more of a challenge, but for many humans, other people are one of the main challenges. And it is not unusual for humans to whom you give the capacity to make you happy, or humans who you expect to be made happy by, and for a little while the other human makes you happy. It's called an intimate relationship. When you sign a form, it's called marriage. The human that makes you happy, then suddenly something shifts and turns around, and this very human that made you so happy becomes your enemy and makes you very unhappy. If there are any divorce lawyers here, then I congratulate you, because that is a wonderful job, because you really get to know human unconsciousness at first hand. You encounter humans at their most unconscious, unless they're able to deal with that situation in a more conscious way, which means they are, if not awakened, but they are awakening out of their unconscious state of being of total identification with the ego, because that is the essence of the unconscious state, total identification with the ego. And then you can practice, if you are conscious and you do go through a separation, it is no longer traumatic. It doesn't have to be traumatic. It becomes particularly traumatic if both are unconscious. Both sides are unconscious. Millions of humans have no access, it seems, to the spiritual dimension, totally reduced to being consumers and believing in certain ideologies, being completely conditioned by the surrounding culture, except people like you. Because traditionally, access to the spiritual dimension, to the transcendent dimension, to the being, traditionally access was given by the traditional religions. Now, in many cases, religions degenerated to a tool of the human ego. They were misused more and more by the human ego for power and control. That's true. They degenerated into ideologies that you could identify with, and then anybody who didn't exactly share your belief system in every detail would immediately become your enemy, and you could kill them. Completely insane. And yet, even though that happened, and that is the case, there was still a tiny opening left within all the religions. And some religions became more egoically restricted than others. Christianity very strongly. In Islam also, there's a tendency for coming into the service of strengthening the human ego instead of liberating from the human ego. But there's always some opening is there still, even though all this has happened in the great religions, all of them, there is still a small opening into the transcendent dimension. A tiny bit of light still coming through for humans. Even, let's say, you go to church every Sunday, and it's just a cultural thing, or you have to do it because you don't want to belong, and it doesn't. And then and yet maybe they read the words of Jesus and, in a very boring way, usually. Look at the flowers of the field, how they spin not, neither do they weave, and yet Solomon, in all his glory, is not attired, one of these, be in the present moment. Well. And yet there could be something can still filter through, a little bit of light coming through the old structures. And then in Christianity you look at the cross, or in Catholic you look at the man on the cross, and perhaps you're going through intense suffering at that moment. And it could happen that you look at the suffering of the archetypal. I saw Jesus, the archetypal human. You look at the suffering entity, and you begin to identify with that figure on the cross. not believe in, that seems a bit superficial, but if you identify with, you become it. And that could take you to deep acceptance, and the deep acceptance can bring about the opening into the spiritual dimension, surrender, no longer letting go of all resistance. And then it could become an opening into the divine, the cross. Because the cross points to the fact of suffering, but it's also a symbol for the divine, dual nature, suffering and resurrection or awakenings through suffering. It's all there, not explained verbally, because people wouldn't have understood if that had been explained to them verbally. They're all concepts, but just to see that, I mean, the central teaching in Buddhism is dukkha, and the Buddha summarized his teaching as, I teach suffering at the end of suffering. And the central image of Christianity is a man who is suffering and who then dies and is born again. But now there are millions of humans for whom the old religions, especially in the Western world, in parts of the East, those religions become totally meaningless. So they've thrown out, the expression, the baby and the bathwater. So they reject things that seem a bit childish in these old religions, all those elements. Even the concept of God is a bit childish in the traditional sense, a man with a beard, a guy with a beard, who controls things but allows people to suffer. This is a very childish view of God, and because of that, they don't believe in that anymore, but they cannot see the deeper meaning that is still hiding behind all that, so they throw out the baby with the bathwater. I don't know where the expression, somebody must have started it somewhere. I don't know how nobody would ever throw out the baby with the bathwater. I suppose what it implies is the bathwater is dirty and it needs to go, but the baby is precious. But you don't throw them out together. So now millions of humans have no access, it seems, to the spiritual dimension, totally reduced to being consumers and believing in certain ideologies, being completely conditioned by the surrounding culture, except people like you who are able to go deeper. It's still a relative minority. What the percentage is, I don't know. Depends from country to country and so on. People who are actually awakening. So if anybody who is practitioner of any traditional religion here, no matter what it is, Hinduism, Judaism, Islam, Christianity, whatever it may be, it's very easy you don't need to abandon it. You just go deep enough to see the truth that's still hiding at the core of it. Or if you've become so disenchanted with your religion because of your upbringing or whatever, then you could leave it behind, and then you go more deeply. If it becomes a hindrance rather than a help, then you would put it aside, because religion is no more than a vehicle